Everyone knows Waylon, Willie, and Dolly. Their names are carved into country music history, and rightfully so. But tucked between the legends and the radio staples were a dozen other artists who delivered some of the most honest, hard-hitting, and flat-out gorgeous country music ever recorded, and then quietly disappeared before the world could give them what they were owed. Today we're bringing 12 of them back because true fans never really let go, and some of these names are long overdue for another listen. Number 12, Gary Stewart. She's acting single, I'm drinking doubles.
I've seen men look at her before.
Before you could name the song, that voice already had you. Raw, ragged around the edges, and soaked in something that didn't sound rehearsed or polished or radio approved. Gary Stewart sounded like a man who had actually lived every word he was singing, and the truth is, most of the time, he had. Born in Letcher County, Kentucky, and raised in Fort Pierce, Florida, Stewart came up the hard way. He spent years writing songs for other people, picking up session work, and circling the edges of Nashville before RCA finally gave him a real shot. When they did, he didn't deliver a safe debut. He delivered something wilder. She's Actin' Single, I'm Drinking Doubles, arrived in 1975, and it hit number 1 on the Billboard country charts with a directness that caught even his label off guard. There was no metaphor softening the blow, no gentle melody cushioning the heartbreak, just a two-step groove and a lyric that said exactly what it meant. The track was recorded at RCA's Studio B in Nashville, the same room where Elvis had cut dozens of sessions and Chet Atkins had shaped the Nashville sound for 2 decades. But Stewart didn't sound like the Nashville sound. He sounded like honky tonk at its most unfiltered. Producers understood this about him and mostly stayed out of the way, letting that voice do what it did best. He followed it with more chart success and an album called Out of Hand that remains one of the most underappreciated country records of the entire decade. Critics noticed, hardcore fans noticed, but mainstream audiences moved on, and Stewart never found the kind of staying power his talent deserved. He continued recording through the 80s and into the 90s, but personal struggles kept pulling him back from the edge of the breakthrough that always seemed just out of reach. He passed away in 2003, and the tributes that followed were full of the kind of language reserved for people the world failed to fully appreciate while they were still here. If you've never heard She's Actin' Single on a proper sound system at the right volume, do yourself the favor. It still hits like a freight train. Number 11, Freddy Hart, Easy Loving.
Every day's Thanksgiving to count all my blessings.
Some records don't just top the charts, they redefine what a format thinks it can be. Freddy Hart didn't arrive in Nashville with an easy story. Born in Locapoca, Alabama, the 11th of 15 children, he left home in his early teens and spent years working manual labor jobs before music pulled him in a direction that felt less like a choice and more like a calling. He taught himself guitar, found his way into the honky-tonk circuit, and eventually landed in Nashville with enough grit and patience to outlast the years when nothing was breaking his way. Easy Loving came out in 1971, and it landed like something the format hadn't quite heard before. Where most country production of the period was leaning into the lush Nashville sound, all strings and orchestration and softened edges, Easy Loving moved in the opposite direction. It was clean, spare, and quietly sensual in a way that felt genuinely adult without being obvious about it. The guitar tone was warm and unhurried. The arrangement left space around every note, and Hart's vocal sat right in the center of all that open air and let the lyric breathe. He recorded it at Capitol's Nashville studio with producer Tommy Hill, and the production reflected a shared instinct between the two of them that less was almost always more. Nothing was added that the song hadn't asked for. Nothing was taken away that needed to stay. The country music world responded immediately. Easy Loving went to number 1 and stayed there. Then it won the Country Music Association Award for Song of the Year. Then it won CMA Single of the Year. Then Freddy Hart won CMA Male Vocalist of the Year. Then it happened again the following year. Back-to-back wins across multiple categories, the kind of award sweep that, in any other era, would have made him a permanent fixture in the conversation about who defined the format. For a few years in the early 70s, he was arguably the biggest name in country music. The record-buying public had decided, the industry had confirmed it twice over. And his name was in every serious discussion about where the sound was heading. And then, with the particular indifference that the music industry reserves for even its most decorated artists, the momentum faded, shifting tastes, changing radio priorities, and the relentless forward motion of a format that never stops looking for the next thing pulled attention away before Hart's legacy had fully set in the public imagination. He kept recording and performing with characteristic steadiness, never chasing the commercial tide that had already turned, never pretending to be something he wasn't in order to win back an audience that had moved on. There is a dignity in that choice that doesn't always get acknowledged, but it should. Today, Freddy Hart's name rarely comes up in casual country conversation. The awards he won are documented in the history books, but the feeling of what he delivered at his peak has drifted further from common memory than it has any right to be. Put it on and notice how much the silence between the notes is doing. That's not an accident. That's a craftsman who knew exactly what he had. Number 10, Razzy Bailey, Midnight Hauler.
This 18-wheel is rolling heavy through the desert night.
Not every country artist had a grand backstory. Some of them just showed up, cut something undeniable, and let the work speak. Razzy Bailey was that kind of artist. Born in LaGrange, Georgia, he spent the better part of a decade playing bars and small clubs in the Southeast, refining a style that blended traditional country with a loose, soulful ease that wasn't coming out of Nashville at the time. His influences were broader than most of his contemporaries were willing to admit in public, and it showed in every track he cut. Midnight Hauler arrived in 1980 and went to number 1, carried by a trucking theme that fit the era perfectly, and a vocal performance that had a warmth and effortlessness that made it feel lived in from the first listen. The production handled by his longtime collaborators kept things clean and spacious, letting Bailey's phrasing breathe rather than smothering it in strings and studio gloss. He followed it with a remarkable run through the early 80s, stacking up 9 number 1 singles in roughly 4 years. 9. That's not a one-hit wonder, that's a career. And yet somehow, Razzy Bailey never became the household name that level of commercial success should have guaranteed. Part of the problem was timing. By the mid-80s, the sound of country was shifting fast, moving toward a more polished and pop-influenced direction that didn't leave much room for artists who had built their appeal on a more understated kind of soul. Bailey didn't fit the new template, and the label machinery moved on. He never stopped performing. He returned to the circuit, found his audience in live settings, and kept recording on smaller imprints. But the mainstream never came back for him, and that remains one of the genuine mysteries of this era. You'll find yourself wondering how this voice ever got lost in the first place. Number 9, Earl Thomas Conley, Holding Her and Loving You. If there was ever an artist in country music who delivered hit after hit, while somehow remaining invisible to the casual listener, it was Earl Thomas Conley. Born in Portsmouth, Ohio, Conley came to Nashville with a songwriter's instinct and a vocalist's ear for emotional precision. He didn't oversell, he didn't chew the scenery. He found the exact center of a lyric and delivered it straight. And the result was a run of recordings in the early to mid-80s that stands up to almost anything from that era. Holding Her and Loving You, released in 1982, went to number 1 and became the kind of track that holds up because its emotional premise is true in the way only really good country writing can be. It's not complicated. A man is in a situation he didn't plan for, feeling 2 things at once, and the song holds both of them without flinching. Conley's vocal sits right in the middle of that tension and doesn't move. He recorded much of his material at Young Unsound in Nashville with producer Nelson Larkin, and the production aesthetic they built together was warm, focused, and careful. Nothing was flashy. Everything served the song. Between 1983 and 1986, Conley scored an almost unbelievable 18 number 1 country singles. 18. The kind of run that in a just world would have made him one of the defining figures of the format. And among serious country fans and music historians, he is exactly that. But outside of that world, the name rarely comes up. Some artists are simply more famous with musicians than with audiences. Conley was one of those. Other singers covered his songs, producers studied his phrasing, and peers spoke about him with the kind of respect usually reserved for the untouchable greats. He just never crossed into the mainstream consciousness the way his output warranted. He scaled back in the 90s, but never fully stepped away, performing for audiences who had never forgotten him, even when the charts had moved on. Find Holding Her and Loving You, then find Fire and Smoke, then set aside an afternoon and go deeper, because the catalog rewards it. Number 8, John Conlee, Rose-Colored Glasses. There was something about John Conlee that didn't fit the standard country mold, and that was exactly what made him work. He had been a licensed mortician before he ever stepped behind a microphone in a professional capacity. He spent years working in radio. And when he finally landed a record deal, he didn't deliver the polished Nashville product the industry was accustomed to. He delivered something more weathered and real. Rose-Colored Glasses came out in 1978, and it went to number 5, which undersells how good it is. The track was built around a simple but devastating premise. A man in a relationship that isn't working, refusing to see it clearly, because seeing it clearly would mean facing something he isn't ready for. That's not a complicated idea. But in Conlee's hands, with production by Bud Logan at Emerald Studios in Nashville, it became something that felt almost uncomfortably honest. The arrangement is spare, the melody is understated, and Conlee's baritone just tells you the truth and lets it sit there. He followed it with more chart success through the early 80s, notching number 1 singles with Lady Lay Down and Backside of 30, and building an audience of the kind of devoted listeners who take country music personally. His live performances were known for their directness, no showmanship for its own sake, just a man and a microphone and songs that earned their weight. The mid-80s shift in country's commercial direction hit him the same way it hit a lot of artists from his era. The format wanted something brighter, and younger, and glossier, and Conlee was none of those things on purpose. He stayed in the circuit, continued recording, and never seemed particularly troubled by the fact that mainstream country had moved on without him. That kind of integrity is rarer than it sounds. And Rose-Colored Glasses is still one of the most honest breakup songs this format ever produced. Number 7, Lacy J. Dalton, Crazy Blue Eyes. She had a voice that didn't belong to any single decade or sound. Lacy J. Dalton grew up in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, far from Nashville, and came to country music through folk, rock, and a life that had seen more than its share of hard turns. She had been a struggling artist through much of the 70s, changing her name, changing her sound, and eventually finding her way to Columbia Records through a demo tape that stopped people in their tracks. Crazy Blue Eyes broke her nationally in 1979, and it was immediately clear she was something different. The vocal had grit and tenderness at the same time, a combination that very few singers in any format have ever managed to balance without one overpowering the other. Dalton made it sound natural. She recorded it at Columbia's Nashville studio with producer Billy Sherrill, the man who had shaped the careers of Tammy Wynette and Charlie Rich, and understood that the best country productions gave the singer room to lead. With Dalton, that instinct was correct. The arrangement builds slowly, letting her voice carry the weight of the lyric until the whole thing opens up in the chorus with a force that still catches you off guard the first time you hear it. She scored more chart entries through the early 80s, with Hard Times and 16th Avenue becoming fan favorites that spoke directly to working people in language they recognized. Dalton wasn't writing from observation. She was writing from inside the experience, and audiences could feel the difference. Industry shifts and label changes disrupted her momentum in the mid-80s, and the commercial breakthrough that always seemed close never fully arrived. She continued performing and recording independently, building a loyal following that kept her connected to the music even when the industry had moved its attention elsewhere. Crazy Blue Eyes remains the best introduction. But 16th Avenue, a tribute to the struggling songwriters and musicians who give everything to Nashville without guarantee of return, might be the song that explains who she was better than anything else she ever recorded. Before we get to the top 6, let's slow down for a second. Which of these names did you already know? Which one surprised you? Was there an artist in those early slots who took you straight back to a specific drive, a specific kitchen, a specific moment you'd half forgotten? Country music has always been about memory, about holding on to the things time tries to take. Drop your favorites in the comments, Tell Us the Song, Tell Us the Memory. We read every single one of them. Number 6, Terri Gibbs, Somebody's Knockin'. She was blind from birth, classically trained, and completely unlike anything country radio had heard when she arrived in 1981. Terri Gibbs grew up in Augusta, Georgia, learning piano by ear before she could fully articulate what she was doing musically. She played gospel, jazz, and country with equal fluency. And when she walked into a Nashville studio for the first time as a signed artist, the blend of all three things was right there in everything she did. Somebody's Knockin' was her debut single, and it shot to number 8 on the country charts while also crossing into the Pop Top 20, a crossover that reflected just how broadly appealing her voice was when the right material found it. The song itself has a slight jazz shuffle underneath it, a darkness in the lyric that most country radio wasn't dealing in at the time, and a vocal that switches between innocence and knowing with an ease that sounds effortless, but absolutely wasn't. Recorded at Polygram's Nashville studio, the production walked a careful line between the country instrumentation her label needed and the bluesier undertow that made the song feel alive. Producer Ed Penny understood what he had in Gibbs and kept the arrangement from overwhelming her, which was the right call. She earned a Grammy nomination for Best Female Country Vocal Performance that year, losing to Dolly Parton, which is not a loss that diminishes anything, but the follow-up singles never found the same footing. And by the mid-80s, the commercial momentum had faded. She returned to gospel music, which is where much of her deepest musicianship had always lived, and continued performing with the same unassuming precision that had made her debut so arresting. Somebody's Knockin' deserves to be on every list of underheard country singles from the era. It's a masterclass in how much atmosphere a vocal can carry all by itself. Number 5, T.G. Sheppard, Last Cheater's Waltz. If the late 70s and early 80s had a resident smooth voice of country music, it belonged to T.G. Sheppard. Born William Neal Browder in Humboldt, Tennessee, Sheppard had spent years in the music industry before finding his place as a recording artist. He had worked in promotion for RCA, where he developed an understanding of the commercial side of the business that informed how he approached his own recordings. He knew what radio wanted, and he was good enough to deliver it without compromising what made him interesting. Last Cheater's Waltz came out in 1979, and it went all the way to number 1. The production was silky and precise, built around a melody that moved with the same easy grace the title promised. Sheppard's vocal was warm and unhurried, never pushing harder than the song required, and the result was the kind of track that sounded good on a bar jukebox and equally good on late-night radio with the volume turned low. Recorded in Nashville with producer Buddy Killen, who had been a foundational figure at Tree Publishing and understood classic Nashville construction inside and out, the track exemplified what Sheppard did best. He didn't reinvent the form. He honored it with enough personality to make the familiar feel personal. He charted consistently through the early 80s, scoring number 1s with I Loved 'Em Every One and Do You Want to Go to Heaven, building a reputation as one of the more reliable hitmakers of the format. But reliable rarely translates to legendary in the pop culture memory, and Sheppard's name has faded from casual country conversation in a way that his catalog doesn't justify. He never fully stepped away from performing, and has remained a visible presence on the touring circuit, particularly among audiences who grew up with his run of hits and never stopped claiming him. Last Cheater's Waltz is the essential entry point. Put it on and let the production do what it was designed to do. Number 4, Gene Watson, Farewell Party. There are singers in country music, and then there are vocalists. Gene Watson was the second thing in a way that made even the first category nervous. Born in Palestine, Texas, Watson came up the slow way, working as an auto body repairman in Houston while playing the club circuit at night and on weekends. He wasn't waiting to be discovered. He was building something night by night, room by room, in the kind of small Texas venues that either harden a performer or break them completely. Watson came out the other side with a voice that had been refined by repetition into something close to perfect. Farewell Party arrived in 1979, and it stopped people cold. The premise was not new to country music, a man at the end of a marriage raising one final toast before it's officially over. But the way Watson sang it was something else entirely. The control in his voice was almost unsettling. He never pushed for the emotion. He let it surface on its own, and it came up from somewhere real and deep and unmistakable. Recorded at Criteria Studios in Houston with producer Gary Paxton, the production kept its hands off what Watson was doing and trusted the vocal to carry the weight. That trust was justified completely. The arrangement built slowly around him, strings entering with enough restraint to support rather than smother. And the whole thing landed with the kind of quiet devastation that only the best country records manage. It went to number 3 on the Billboard country charts and introduced a mainstream audience to a voice that serious fans in Texas had already been claiming for years. Critics reached for superlatives. Fellow musicians spoke about him in the specific reverent tones reserved for someone whose technique genuinely intimidates. He followed it with 14 Karat Mind in 1981, which went all the way to number 1. And showed he hadn't been a single song story. The voice was just as focused, the production just as careful, and the emotional delivery just as precise. He had range and he had control. And he had that rare quality where you believed every word simply because of how he chose to sing it. And then the format moved on in the way it always does, chasing younger faces and brighter sounds. And Watson's particular brand of classic vocalism didn't fit the new template that country radio was building for itself through the mid-'80s. Label support thinned. Chart appearances became less frequent. The commercial window closed. What makes his story particularly pointed is that his voice never declined. Recordings he made decades later carry the same authority and emotional precision as his peak commercial work. The format left him. He didn't leave it. He has remained a fiercely respected figure among musicians and traditional country devotees, the kind of artist who gets standing ovations from other singers because the people who understand technique understand exactly what they're watching. Then find 14 Karat Mind. Then let the catalog take you wherever it leads, because every stop is worth making. Number 3. Mel Street, Borrowed Angel. Some voices carry the full weight of traditional country without ever straining to prove it. Mel Street was one of those voices, and the country music world never fully reckoned with what it had in him while it still had the chance. Born King Malachi Street in Grundy, Virginia, he spent the better part of 2 decades working regular jobs and playing locally before anyone outside of West Virginia had any reason to know his name. He worked in construction. He ran a gas station. He kept a family together and kept playing music on the side the way men of his generation and background did. Not because a career seemed likely, but because the music was simply part of how he moved through the world. Borrowed Angel came out in 1972 on a small regional label called Metro Media, and it spread the way things spread before radio algorithms and industry machinery got involved. Disc jockeys heard it and played it because it was good. Listeners heard it and called the station to hear it again. Word moved outward from West Virginia and Kentucky and the surrounding region until the song had built enough momentum on its own terms to force the attention of a larger audience. The production was modest by Nashville standards. There was no major studio behind it, no star producer with a proven commercial formula shaping the arrangement. What it had was a vocal performance that made none of that matter. Street's voice was warm and rich and sat low in the chest in a way that communicated something beyond craft. It communicated experience. A man who had lived long enough and quietly enough to understand exactly what a song about devotion was supposed to feel like from the inside. It climbed to number 8 on the Billboard country charts, which for a regional independent release with limited backing was a result that reflected genuine word-of-mouth power rather than industry machinery doing its work. People found it because other people told them to find it, and when they did, they understood immediately why it was being passed around. He moved to GRT Records and then to Polydor, scoring a series of chart entries through the mid-'70s that built a respectable commercial profile without ever generating the kind of mainstream crossover moment that translates a working country artist into a household name. Lovin' on Back Streets, Smoky Mountain Memories, each one delivered with the same unhurried authority that had made Borrowed Angel travel so far on so little. The industry recognized something in him without ever quite knowing what to do with it. He was traditional at a moment when traditional was both valued and slightly underserved by a format still sorting out its relationship with the pop audience. He was Appalachian in a world where country's geography was being redrawn around Texas and California. He fit, but not perfectly. And in the music business, imperfect fits rarely get the full investment they might deserve. He passed away on his 45th birthday in 1978, and what followed was the particular silence that greets artists who leave before the culture has located the right language to describe what they were doing. The tributes were warm but limited. The catalog was already beginning its drift toward the edges of availability. What remains is a body of work that rewards the listener who finds it with the feeling that something genuinely valuable had been sitting in the margins all along. Borrowed Angel doesn't sound like a regional independent release from 1972. It sounds like a classic because that is precisely what it is. Then follow the catalog wherever the voice leads you. You will not be looking for the exits. Number 2. David Frizzell. I'm Gonna Hire a Wino to Decorate Our Home. Some songs arrive with a title so perfect that they've already told you half of what they're going to say before the first note plays. David Frizzell was the younger brother of the legendary Lefty Frizzell, which meant he grew up with one of country music's greatest vocalists as a close-range model and spent much of his early career being measured against a standard that would have been unfair to almost anyone. He handled it with grace, developed his own voice and sensibility, and built a respectable career through the 70s before landing the record that would define him. I'm Gonna Hire a Wino to Decorate Our Home came out in 1982, and it went to number 1, and it did so on the back of a lyric that was both genuinely funny and unexpectedly sharp. A woman addressing her husband who would rather spend his time in a bar than at home, deciding that if he's going to live that way, she's going to make the house look like where he'd rather be. Neon signs in the hallway, sawdust on the floor. The point made with a smile and a directness that lands harder for not being angry. The recording was produced by Snuff Garrett at Garrett's California studio, which gave it a slightly different sonic texture than a straight Nashville production would have. The arrangement was bright and playful, without losing the country backbone that gave the lyric its bite. Frizzell had already scored success in duets with Shelley West, most notably You're the Reason God Made Oklahoma, which had appeared on the Clint Eastwood film's soundtrack and introduced him to a large new audience. But this solo moment was his alone, and he owned every second of it. He continued recording through the 80s and built a loyal following among fans who appreciated the intelligence underneath the humor. Follow-up singles found audiences without ever replicating the breakout scale of his peak moment. Industry winds shifted. The easy commercial momentum didn't last. He remained a respected figure in traditional country circles and a performer whose live shows maintained the warmth and wit that had always been his calling card. I'm Gonna Hire a Wino to Decorate Our Home is one of those songs that teaches you something about the format every time you listen carefully. It's funny on the surface, but underneath the joke, there's a real marriage falling apart, and the song holds both things without losing its balance. Number 1. Johnny Paycheck, She's All I Got. There is a short list of country voices that stop you before you've had time to decide how you feel about them. Johnny Paycheck belongs on that list, and the fact that most people only know one song of his is one of the great quiet injustices in the history of the format. Born Donald Eugene Lytle in Greenfield, Ohio, Paycheck arrived in Nashville as a teenager with a voice that was already fully formed and a personal history that was already complicated. He found early work as a session bass player and backup singer, contributing to recordings by George Jones and Ray Price, and absorbing everything those rooms had to teach about how great country music was built from the inside. He was watching the best practitioners in the format work at close range, and he was learning. His early attempts at a solo career were uneven, complicated by personal instability and label situations that never quite aligned with what he was capable of delivering. He recorded under different names. He changed direction more than once. He disappeared from the commercial radar for stretches long enough that the industry had quietly filed him under lost causes before he came back and proved everyone wrong. She's All I Got came out in 1971 on Little Darlin' Records, a small independent label that had neither the budget nor the infrastructure of the major Nashville operations, and it went to number 2 on the Billboard country charts on the strength of nothing but the song and the voice delivering it. There was no promotional machine behind it, no industry momentum, no carefully managed rollout strategy. Just a recording that was so plainly and completely itself that radio had no choice but to play it, and listeners had no choice but to respond. The production was lean and direct, recorded with an economy that suited the lyric perfectly. A man who has lost everything the world told him mattered and found that the one thing he has left is enough. Not triumphant, not defeated, just true. In the specific way that only the best country writing manages to be true. The way that makes a listener feel recognized rather than entertained. Paycheck's vocal on that track does something that very few singers in any format can do convincingly. It holds vulnerability and toughness in the same breath without letting either one win. The emotion is right on the surface, but there's a spine underneath it that keeps the whole thing from collapsing into sentiment. It is a performance of genuine sophistication, delivered by a man who would have laughed at the word sophisticated and been right to do so. He followed it with more chart success through the early 70s before his career was again derailed by the personal chaos that seemed to trail him everywhere he went. And then came 1977, and Take This Job and Shove It, the David Allen co-penned anthem that gave Paycheck his biggest commercial moment and simultaneously reduced him, in the public imagination, to a single working-class punchline. The song was real, and it was good, and it deserved its success. But it became the only thing a casual listener could tell you about a man whose catalog contained depths that one novelty moment could never adequately represent. The years that followed were hard in ways that went beyond the music industry's usual indifference. Legal trouble, prison time, health problems that compounded one another, and left him diminished in ways that were painful for anyone who had followed what he was capable of at his best. He passed away in 2003, the same year as Gary Stewart, as though that year had decided to take more than its share. What he left behind, if you're willing to go looking for it, is the work of a singer who understood country music from the cellular level up, and delivered it with a combination of technical command and raw feeling that very few artists in the format's history have matched. Not because it is the flashiest entry point or the most immediately arresting, but because it tells you immediately and without apology exactly who Johnny Paycheck was when everything else was stripped away. A voice that had earned every note it sang. Music the world was too distracted to fully receive. That's the one. Go find it. That's 12 overlooked country artists who gave everything to the format and didn't always get back what they put in. Some had brief windows at the top and faded before the world could hold on to them. Some built careers that the mainstream simply refused to see clearly. And some left behind a single song so true and so complete that it still sounds fresh every time it comes on. If you want to keep going, check out our next video on 10 forgotten country albums from the 70s that belong in every serious collection. More deep cuts, more stories, and more music that deserved more than it got. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep the music alive.